Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reski.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
Welcome back to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and I am joined tonight with two good friends, Jim Reski and Randy Nickel. The three of us are very excited because we have a special guest that we're interviewing, Valerie O'Brien, and we have an important topic that we're going to talk about. It's a topic that's on a lot of people's minds in the world, and that is understanding Generation Z. And not only are we going to try to understand Generation Z, but we're going to talk about how can we effectively minister to this generation? Because I don't know about you, but I feel like there's been a huge cultural shift happening that I've never experienced in my life. So we're going to talk about how this all came about and some of the historical backgrounds to it. So Val, welcome to the show. Why don't you just take a minute or two and introduce yourself to our audience?
No, thank you guys so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to get to join you and talk about something that I really love to get to talk about. So thank you so much. But my name is Val O'Brien. I am born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. And I've been doing ministry primarily with students, primarily middle school and high school students, but that always trickles into college students also, for about the last 12 years. So I've been primarily in local church ministry, which I loved, and being a part of everything from, planning the events to writing discipleship curriculum, all that type of stuff. So really loved that. And just about 2 years ago now, stepped out of local church ministry to work for a parachurch organization that trains young leaders. So, especially in student ministry, it's kind of like dog years. You become like the old person when you've been in it for, only 10 years. So suddenly I was in the role of the teacher, which I wasn't expecting, but has really been delightful and I love it. So the organization I work for now is Josiah Venture. We work, like I said, with young leaders, helping them understand the mission and the strategy of Jesus and starting a movement among young people. So really love to do that. I'm passionate, like I said, about the local church. I'm passionate about young people, students, young leaders, and just love Jesus, love following him, and love just learning what it means to live the abundant life that he set before us. So that's a little bit about me. That's a little bit about my story.
Thank you so much, Val. That's awesome. Before we dive into the topic, I think it's important to kind of just set a framework. When we're talking about understanding culture, what are some of the concerns that we should have? Because sometimes we make these big statements and there's people that never fit the generalizations that we make. What would be some of those concerns? Because we are going to talk specifically about Gen Z, but just to kind of give some framework, what would you say?
No, I think that there's absolutely some concerns that I have whenever I speak about just cultural differences and those types of things. And I always feel like are good baselines to kind of start with this conversation. And the first one is always, and Greg, you kind of leaned into this already, is that you're always making generalizations. And I read recently in a book somebody that said that generalizations are always wrong and usually helpful. And I'm like, that is a very good way of describing it. They are always wrong, but they're usually a little bit helpful. And I don't know if anyone has done the Strengths Finder, but my number one in Strengths Finder is the individualizer. So I am like anti at my core making broad generalizations. It is just not something I love to do. I love seeing each person as an individual. But when we have these conversations, we have to talk in generalities. And that really does help us with the landscape of it. And I was even thinking, whenever we have these types of conversations, It's similar here in Cleveland. We have an amazing art museum and we have a beautiful Monet water lilies. And, if you step back and you look at the water lilies, you'll say, oh, it's in cool colors. It's, this is what it's depicting. But then you step up and you see all the individual brush strokes, and some of them are yellow and some of them are red, and they're all different. And so I think that that's kind of just the tension. One of the tensions that we have to keep in mind is we have to make generalizations when we have these conversations. That's stepping back and looking at the whole painting. But really, when we engage people, we're engaging individual brush strokes. We're always engaging individuals. And that's what we want to do. But the second thing that I'm always a little bit leery of too, and we need to be careful of, is that we don't become cultural relativists, and so that's somebody who is, criticizing another or talking about another culture, and kind of presenting all of them like they're just equal. Like no culture, or you have no real right to critique anything about a culture that you're not a part of. And we can kind of take on this mindset of everybody's equal, you do it different, I do it different, everybody's okay. But the reality is that we have a different culture as followers of Jesus. We come under the kingdom culture of Jesus. And we will always, it's natural human instinct to default to our own culture, and to think that it's superior to others. But we need to remember that we don't judge other cultures against our own, that we put all things under the authority of Jesus. And that's actually the beautiful thing about following Jesus, is that it transcends culture, it transcends generations. And so we're not cultural relativists, but we're Jesus culture. Like we are lining everything up to who Jesus is, to what his word says. And then the third thing is that we can so often just say, sometimes we just want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and just say, like, don't people just need Jesus? And I love that. And my heart resonates with that too. I'm like, that's a great criticism. Like, aren't people always the same? And don't people just need Jesus? And I say, absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. People are people. But the message of the gospel has always been about our hearts. And when we talk about the message of Jesus, we want to engage somebody's heart. And these cultural barriers that can exist can quickly become walls that prevent us from really engaging with somebody's heart. Even in Bible translation, they always talk about translating the Bible into the heart language of the people. And so I kind of think about even talking about culture like that. We might be speaking the same language, but are we able to engage in the heart language of the people around us, so that their heart is soft and it's tender towards the gospel? And so I think that that's just an important thing to be considering also. Do people need Jesus? Absolutely. But we want to be able to speak in a way that connects with their hearts. And so those are the three things, at least for me, my fear and trembling in speaking about culture. Those things always come up to me. And so hopefully that kind of addresses maybe some of the concerns out there also.
Hey, Val, hey, it's Jim. First of all, I just want to say we're just so excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Yes, in particular, just for our audience that doesn't know, but I want to tell you how much I appreciate your work with my daughter. When she was in high school. So wonderful. You were such a strong spiritual influence on her life, and just eternally grateful for that. But I'm fascinated by what you were just saying. I think it's very interesting. I just had to explore that with you a little more. That notion you were talking about cultural relativism. How do you deal with that and communicate that? Because so many people in the world today, and I don't want to overgeneralize that Gen Z people think this way, but the general thought is all culture is relative. Nothing is better than anything else. So, and then because your thought on cultural relativism was one thing, and then you're talking about, well, we are part of the Jesus culture, and they would say, well, that's very nice, that's fine for you, That's your culture, but I've got mine. And how dare you say your Jesus culture is superior to my culture?
Yeah.
Because they're all relative. So you're coming at a group of people that already say it is all relative. Nothing's more superior. And how dare you push your Jesus culture on me? Right. And so as you're interfacing with people in that culture, and you're at the same time trying to communicate a gospel, like you just said about just the love of Jesus, to say the gospel message is we're not superior to you. We're broken, lost sinners that, we're beggars that have found bread, right? We found Jesus. I wonder if you have come across that and have experience with that, because it seems like the message can almost be at loggerheads. You're dealing with somebody who says, how dare you push your culture on me?
Right. Well, one of the things that I found, sometimes these conversations, rarely is somebody able to articulate that, especially a young person. Hardly ever do they get into that, like kind of a philosophical conversation about it. It more often comes up in like in more of just a moral relativity conversation, of like, how dare you say that that's wrong, those types of things. So I think that some of that is just kind of the general relativism, which we absolutely will talk about and is like a defining characteristic of the next generation. But I think one of the really cool things for me in talking to people who have a hard time, understanding that, is to just always come back to the person of Jesus. And so I climb at a rock gym, and I love getting to do that, and have just met some wonderful, wonderful people there and had some just amazing conversations. But, like one of the simple things that I always say is I'm like, you know what? And that's one of the reasons why I actually really love following Jesus, because he says this and he says this, and that just really resonates with my heart. And all of a sudden it becomes this, and they're like, oh, yeah, no, that's very, very interesting. And then we keep going in the conversation. But I think, for me personally, that's been a way that I just in those interpersonal conversations have kind of combated that, like come up against that and just bring it back to the person of Jesus, and the life that he calls us to live. And then again, the question of moral relativity is a hard one, is a really, really hard and tricky thing for this generation, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. Randy, did you have something you
wanted? Hey, Val. This is Randy, and Val, I had a chance to hear Val share some of this information recently, and you did a fantastic job, Val. I really enjoyed it. Felt like I learned a lot. And so excited to hear what you have to say again tonight. But I just wanted to say it seems like we're in the midst of a massive cultural shift, and it's happening right now. And can you kind of share what's behind it?
Yeah. So this was just one of the big findings for me, and one of the things that I really just started researching, because I was feeling the tension of it in my own heart, working with students and just in the conversations I would have. I started doing youth ministry in full-time in 2009, right after I graduated from college. And the conversations I was having with students then, and the conversations that I was having with students 12 years later, were so vastly different. And I felt like interpersonally, I was having good conversations, but even as a group, I just was starting to feel that disconnect of like, I don't feel like I'm resonating with their hearts in the way that I used to. Like, I feel like I'm speaking a different language to them. And what does this mean? Is anyone else feeling this way? But, sometimes you just like, you keep plugging along. And in my head, I'm like, nah, this is just what it's like to get old. Like this is just the normal disconnect of it. And then when I came on staff, when I left church ministry and I came on staff with the organization that I'm with, they said, hey, would you mind stepping into this project with us about intergenerational disciple making, and, where that breakdown appears in the church, in the local church today in America, and that type of thing. And I was like, absolutely, because that's what I'm struggling with. And the more that I started to kind of work on that and have those conversations, I realized that I wasn't alone in how I was feeling, and that so many people who love students, who are seasoned in ministry, who are passionate about what they do, have really been feeling this disconnect. And there's actually a lot that is that is written about it. And it was so interesting and just shed so much light on it and how I do ministry now. But I wish I could map all of this out on a big whiteboard for you all, but I'm going to try to describe it. This was kind of, I want to zoom out and then I want to zoom in for you. So if we zoom out and look at history, my sister is a history teacher, so we have lots of great conversations about this just around my house. But there's three primary eras that that in sociology they talk about. So the first one is the pre-modern era. The pre-modern era, which was pre-1600s. So in that era, it was characterized by the belief in the divine, in the supernatural. Think about the Roman idol worship, that God is out there, not knowable, that truth is found in the divine and it's out there. And then we enter from there into the modern era, 1600s into about the 20th century. The modern era, which we're much more familiar with, characterized by man being central instead of the divine, that we are looking to mankind for hope and for guidance and to science and human reasoning, and kind of this like truth is found in mankind. If we work together, we can figure it out. That's where we have, in the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, kind of like if we can rally together, truth is found in humanity. We can figure this out. And this is just fascinating to me. The major invention that tipped this era from one to another, from the pre-modern era to the modern era, was the invention of the printing press. And historians will point to this. And it makes perfect sense that all of a sudden they're able to easily pass down knowledge to each other. And all of a sudden humans have all of these resources. They're passing knowledge, they're passing it down to generations. And oh my goodness, if we rally together, we can figure this out. That's the modern era. Now then we start to tip into the postmodern era. Now, the postmodern era, we've been talking about this for a long time. We've been seeing the rumblings of this coming in art. We've been seeing it in universities. We've been seeing it in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. We've known that postmodernity is coming, and it is here. It has arrived, and this is the postmodern era. Their kind of mantra is that truth is found in myself. So we go from the pre-modern era where truth is out there to the modern era where truth is found among us, to the postmodern era where truth is found in myself, that I determine then what is true. And they're these self-determined truths, whatever feels good to us, the reliance on emotion and stories, decisions that are based on feelings and not facts. Those are some of kind of the characteristics of that line of thinking. Now, the amazing thing, again, and it's not hard to guess, is that like the invention that tipped the scales into really embracing the postmodern era was the invention of the internet. And all of a sudden now we're completely inundated with information. About a year ago, I read this just like the statistic has just blown my mind, but they said this was about a year ago, but they said that in the 2 years prior, that more content had been created in those 2 years than in all of human history up until that point. Whoa. Which just blows my mind. It's all those TikToks during lockdown, but all of those things. Yeah, Greg.
That blows my mind. But,
right.
It's really weird, Val, because, social media, I thought you were going to say the invention was social media. That
was Facebook.
push us over the edge.
Drill down. Yeah.
But it seems like this is the way I feel is like, when the internet came, we were in the information age. Mm-hmm. And if you wanted truth, you Googled it and you found the truth. Right. Now it feels like we're in the disinformation age. I don't know. Is that happening? Like now it's like you can't just Google something, because now the internet is filled with all kinds of false truth.
Right.
And and it just feels like such a strange time. And
Right.
am I right in saying it does feel like we're living in this major shift?
Yes. Yes.
Like, it would be interesting if you lived during the time right when the printing press, came. If it actually, I really like what you're sharing, because it does feel like we're in that shift right now,
Yes.
and it is weird.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
Jim, do you want to
Yeah.
make a comment?
Just following up what you're saying, you're saying there's all kinds of falsehood out there and there's all kinds of disinformation out there. But if Val, in keeping with the three phases, the phase we're in now, who's to say what's right? Who's to say what's wrong?
yeah.
Who's to say what's true, what's not true? Truth is found within, right? Yeah, exactly. So there's no sense of information or disinformation. It's all just what you find it within. What you feel like what is really true is true for you.
Right. Right. Kind of the live your truth mantra.
Follow your dreams, kids.
Follow your dreams.
That's
Follow your
right.
dreams.
We used to watch kids movies with their kids, and every movie would end with the same way. Follow your dreams, kids.
Right. Right.
Okay, so Val, let's continue on. And if you wanted to add anything to that, feel free to do that. But okay, so let's talk about Gen Z. Like, I mean, we have all these classifications, right? There's the baby boomers, and then the busters, and then millennials, and now we're in Gen Z. And I think this is where the opening comments of our podcast are important. Like, it's, not everybody fits necessarily in the has the characteristics of all those
Right.
but how does that fit into this?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. Just because, so we see that huge shift taking place in, I had an author who I really, really appreciated. Her name is Jolene Erlacher. She talks a lot about this change that's happening. And she says, it's like the giant tectonic plates of history are shifting. And right now we are in the middle of an earthquake. And I'm like, that is perfect. What a great way to describe how it feels to live right now. That the tectonic plates are shifting. And one of the things that we see, if we really zoom into the generations that you were just talking about, Greg, and listing, is that most of the times generations kind of follow these normal ebbs and flows of shared experiences and shared life events, historical events. And there are these kind of cohorts of people that have a similar way of thinking and a similar way of processing, but they overlap with the generation before them in significant ways. But they have just enough markers that they're a new generation. Well, now what we're seeing is that the waves that were coming pretty even with the generations, they went quiet, and then they hit tsunami, like they were a tsunami. And then another tsunami. And there is such a wide gap, specifically between Gen X and the millennials, and then Gen Z, that it looks less like a generational gap that we've experienced in the past in the United States. And it looks more like a true cultural gap. And that was so insightful to me as I started to really look and to study Gen Z, to say, wait a second, as opposed to saying, oh, these kids are basically like I was, but with an iPhone in their pocket. I have to start thinking, wait a second, these students are more like interacting with a student from a completely different culture than my own.
That's great. I love that. And so what are we learning about Gen Z?
Yeah, I mean, there is so much that has been studied and written on Gen Z. There's just a ton about their trends, about how they respond to education, how they respond in their family systems. There is just a ton. But some of the things that are the most compelling to me that I've seen in Gen Z. Well, first of all, I love students, and they are smart, and they're funny, and they're savvy. And that is just, you see that over and over again, that you just have these savvy little 14-year-olds. And it just blows my mind. They are they typically have been marketed to their entire life, and they can see right through it. They can sniff it right out, and that adds to their savviness. They are hungry for authenticity, for something that's real. We see this in just silly little ways, like studies will show that Gen Z, an individual who's a member of Gen Z, is more inclined to look at all of the reviews on Amazon written by real people than a celebrity endorsement when they go to buy something. They want something that's real, not just that's glitzy and the big commercial about it. They want to know the facts. They want something real. Another thing that I just love about them is they talk so openly about things like previous generations didn't. I was just cracking up laughing. I was with one of my friends who was talking about new employees. He's in his mid-30s. He was talking about these new college interns that were coming to intern at his engineering firm, and how around the lunch table, he's like, they brought up religion, politics, and their salaries right at the lunch table. And I was there going, do you guys know that we do not talk about these things? But Gen Z does. They do. They will just lay it all out on the line. And I think that goes in with the authenticity piece too. But man, it is a beautiful thing for us as followers of Jesus to know about Gen Z is this is not some sort of topic to tiptoe around. They love to talk about faith and religion. They love to talk about serious things. They want to engage about it. They're talking about it anyway. They love to talk about it with you. Just a really, really cool thing about them. And then another one is they seem to just really love a challenge. They want to solve problems. They love a challenge. And just kind of as a generational cohort, that's one of the things that really just ignites them is not just the pursuit of knowledge, but of applied knowledge. They're inundated with so much information, but they're ready to do something with it, and they're ready to solve something, and they love a challenge. And that's one of the things that I just love about this generation also.
I heard some interesting statistics that you may or may not have heard about Gen Z, and these are like Gen Z people that follow Jesus. Mm-hmm. That 52% of Gen Z would consider missions for their future. I don't know if you've heard that, but if of Generation Z, if they follow Jesus, 52% would say they'd be open to missions, and 80% of them who are believers have shared their faith in the last year.
Wow.
So it seems like they might be the most missional generation ever. Does that fit with what you're finding out?
Do you know what? I haven't seen those statistics specifically, but I will tell you that this last year, part of what I did just with my job was we went on what we called a listening tour, and we met with a whole bunch of young leaders in different parts of the country. And I will tell you, I kept telling people that I wish that they could sit where I got to sit and hear the hearts of these young leaders, because I think that Greg, this is probably where that statistic comes from, is the people that are still following Jesus that are in Gen Z are all in. They are all in, and they are on fire for Jesus. And they have had to already, as young people, their faith has probably been tested, and it's been purified, and it's been found to be genuine, and they are ready to go. And it is the most amazing thing to work with some of these young leaders and just see their passion and their love for Jesus. And so that's my guess, not knowing anything more about that statistic. I would say, they have been tried and tested already as young people, and they've had to overcome a lot. And if they're following Jesus, they're all in, and it's awesome.
Val, that's just super encouraging. I got to tell you, because I think every generation always worries about the next generation. I remember when I was a kid hearing talks from older generation talking about, well, we're one generation away from paganism if the next generation after us doesn't follow Jesus. And I thought, hey, you're talking about me, come on now. And so they're always worried about the next generation. Mm-hmm. And to hear you talk about people that when they get it, and they're on fire, mm-hmm. and they're solid. That's just super encouraging and super exciting. But to
Yeah.
follow up on what you were saying, if it's a generation that craves authenticity,
Mhm.
loves a challenge, doesn't mind talking about religious, personal religious things,
Mhm.
how does knowing those three things affect the way you talk to them? Does it make you, for example, say, I'm much more open to share my own testimony, my experience with Jesus. I'm much more likely to broach a subject. Does it make you feel more bold to do that? Because they sounds like they don't want to hear some celebrity endorsement. They want to hear Val's personal testimony.
Right.
Tell me about your authentic experience.
Yeah.
Maybe that carries more weight than the old paradigm we have, like the Billy Graham crusade. The big preacher comes into town, it's the big, attraction. And that's maybe less interesting or persuasive than hearing about Val's personal experience that really touches down and connects. I just don't know if knowing those things, how it shapes how you interact that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just like all of us, I think that particular issue, I think there's so much potential as we do ministry with this young generation.
Yeah.
But also, it's a greatest strength, greatest weakness thing, where, they're willing to talk about religion, but your religion, Jim, exactly what you were bringing up earlier, your religion is just as valid as my faith. I find hope and I find peace this way. And I'm so glad that you have found hope and peace in Jesus. So interesting.
Mm.
We disagree, but that's okay. Everyone can believe what they want. And so I think that's where the rub comes in, like that's the hard thing. But I do think it's so powerful, and it should be so encouraging to all of us that they're interested in those conversations, that we can bring up the real issues of our faith, and that they're willing to listen, because I even think like that's the first step. If they are willing to even start to have a conversation, if you're able to start to talk in a non, I'll just say strange or weird way about Jesus, just have a normal conversation. I think that those are the things that like reach into their heart, like we were talking about earlier. Those are things that connect with their heart. And we pray then for the Holy Spirit to do his work.
Exactly. And I was just going to say that because at some point you say the Holy Spirit's got to work, and then that's you're just trying to introduce them to Jesus.
Yes. Yes.
Val, this is Randy. When you talked earlier, you said that tolerance was one of the greatest values that this generation, Gen Z, valued. Can you talk about that? And it seems to me that when everybody's opinion is of equal value, then truth kind of can get lost among so much. You know what I'm saying? There's a million different ideas, and somehow truth can get lost. So how is tolerance and a part of this generation?
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, I think that is probably one of the biggest hurdles that we face with them. But I have found, even in just small and subtle ways, in a very personal, practical basis. I mean, we all know that relativity doesn't logically make sense. There's a lot of logical fallacies in everybody is right. Everybody cannot be right. There has to be a standard of morality. Even when young people talk about cancel culture, or they'll talk about, who's in, who's out. They're appealing to some sort of standard of morality, and who sets that standard? And where does that standard come from? And even if it comes from me, why do I have a standard? Where does that sense of morality come from, even in me? C.S. Lewis talks about that a lot in Mere Christianity. Where does that sense of morality come from? It has to come from a moral lawgiver. And so I think that even pushing gently on some of those things and say, well, how can that be? I think that there's been such this, there's been such, it's been pushed and promoted that you have to be accepting of everything, that when that's even pushed on, even gently, I've seen the wheels start to turn inside of young people and say, oh yeah, you're right about that. Interesting. And it's a seed that's planted in space then for the Holy Spirit to work.
So along these lines of some of the challenges and concerns of Gen Z, it seems like there's a Generation Z seems to experience a lot more anxiety and depression than previous generations. And like, you know, in my marriage, I'm the anxious one. I know what anxiety feels like. I just have a natural, I'm a worrier, you know, so I understand what anxiety, but it just seems like the anxiety in this generation is just so off the charts.
Mhm.
And is that because of do you have any thoughts on that? Is that because of the internet? Is that because of it seems like social media causes, I want to say it causes anxiety and depression, but I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, yeah. I've been pondering this recently also. I think there's a lot of reasons on the top. I think social media can't be ignored. If you see some of the statistics, and I'm not a researcher by trade, so dig into them for yourself. But if you look at some of the statistics with even social media and smartphone use, and you track them with the rise of depression and anxiety in young people, they follow the exact same trajectory. To me, I'm like, the evidence is pretty indisputable that this is causing it. I'm like, this is my unprofessional opinion. I feel like cell phones and smartphones in the hands of teenagers, and 50 years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to, liken it to when like the kids were rolling around in the backseat of the station wagon without seatbelts on, and say like, whoever thought this was a good idea, So I think we're headed that way with giving kids, unfettered access to the internet and to social media. I think it could be that detrimental to them. So I think that's a very surface, just kind of cultural thing that's going on right now. That's kind of uncharted, that young people, unfortunately, are the guinea pigs for right now. And I think that contributes a lot to it. Even me, I'm 35. When I was in high school, my friends still called the landline and had to talk to my parents for a minute before I came on the phone. And if I didn't want to talk, or I was having a bad day, my mom would say, "Oh, she's not available right now." And that was it. And that doesn't happen anymore. And also, Jim.
I know, I'm just really echoing what you're saying, because you probably know this from talking to my daughter. She would say, because she grew up in the age of social media, she's kind of grown up with it. And she would say, I would think that in my age, you'd have to go to school and get beat up by your friends, and either emotionally, whatever, like, or in the playground or whatever it was. But growing up with social media, the ubiquity of social media, you could feel small and bad about yourself before you rolled out of bed in the morning. You just clicked it on, and then before you even went to brush your teeth in the morning, you're already feeling bad about yourself, other people, and I don't know if there's a gender difference here between men and women, but in general, generationally, sticking with the generation concept.
Yeah.
You just feel bad about yourself because everyone else is prettier than you, everyone else is stronger than you, everyone else is faster than you, everyone else is having more fun than you, everyone was out somewhere that you weren't last night, they're posting about it.
Yep.
And it's just, and you haven't gotten out of bed yet.
Right.
So I couldn't agree with you more.
It's a huge thing. It's a huge thing. And I think like even going deeper into that, what a disconcerting worldview to think that you are the source of all truth.
Yeah.
And that you have to figure out what is true.
It's a burden.
That is a burden. We think that it's going to be freedom, but it's a burden. Right. It's a burden that we weren't meant to carry. And I think that also, even just in these generational differences, like I said, between, that the chasm is so wide, it's more like a cultural difference than a generational difference. I really think even the difficulty sometimes that older people have of even just relating and being in the lives of younger people, I think can help lean into even some of that anxiety and some of that depression. Young people need adults who believe in them, who love them, who are in conversation with them, who are those solid points in their lives. And I think that even if they have that in their parent, they may not have that in as many areas as generations previous did. I think that sometimes we as adults can be afraid of younger generation. We don't know how to relate to them. And we let these walls, we're offended by something that they did. And we let these walls get built up when really young people need they need godly adults. They need people who love them and believe in them in their
Well,
lives. And we need to be willing to do that.
And so have you seen that anxiety and depression, those kinds of tendencies create openings for the gospel? Have you seen people in there? Maybe because I would hope that it creates a receptivity.
Yeah.
As they say, Val, what's the rock in your life, Val? How do you cope with these things? How have you weathered these storms? That you're able to kind of share that. And
Yeah.
and they're seeing, if they're anxious and depressed, not just going to social media for more answers, we're just maybe going to just compound the problem.
Mhm.
Turn to the real Savior, turn to Jesus, and
Yeah.
seeing the solution there.
Yeah, no, I think it has opened huge doors. Even students and their willingness to talk about those things and to bring those concerns to adults, like it's an amazing opportunity to be able to speak into the heart and the longing and the desperation of a student, to speak the truth of Jesus into them. So
One more follow-up on that. How do you deal with that without making it sound like Christianity just has pat answers?
yeah,
In other words, so they're anxious, depressed. If you come and say Jesus is the answer, and they say, oh, that's exactly what I expected you to say.
mm-hmm.
And maybe not to you, Val, but someone my age, they might say, oh, you're an older generation. That's exactly what I expect you to say. That's just a pat answer. It's way too simple. You don't understand. Go away. And I don't know if you've dealt with this, but the idea of saying, how do you deal with a Christianity that is very genuine, that is very nuanced, that is very understanding of many different aspects of life? How do you communicate the gospel in a way that's very, very real to them and doesn't come across like it's pat answer? Go pray more and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Because my sense in the few conversations I've had that way with Gen Z is that they don't want to hear that kind of pat answer at all.
Yeah. No, that's so true. It's really, really true. I think even for me in my own walk with Jesus, I think understanding that Jesus meets us in our brokenness, and that he weeps with us, that he isn't just like, stop complaining, your life is fine, get up and keep moving. But in the areas that I feel hurt or disappointed or abandoned, that Jesus is right there with me.
Wow.
That he mourns and he weeps with me. But he also gives an answer for the pain that I'm feeling. And that a lot of the things, as I've had to talk with students, a lot of them have legitimate hurt that has caused them anxiety and depression. A lot of them have just legitimate burdens that they carry. And to be able to say that Jesus sees you in that and he mourns with you, and yet he is the only one who provides, justice for the things that are wrong. And he provides hope for a future that is to come. And to be able to speak that into them, both, it's the justice and the mercy of God.
That's Val, that is so great, because you're talking about the empathy that they can find that Jesus has for them because of his own brokenness. I mean, so often we come at this like, look, the spiritual truth. You're a sinner. Jesus is the answer. He's the salvation. You should accept him so you can be saved and not go to hell. That's a very, cookie cutter kind of systematic theology approach, actually, a way of approaching it. But now you're talking about someone who's like, understands what you've gone through, who is broken for us, right? And even in Jesus's his own family life, his father died before Jesus went to the cross, and he was not born in a stable home. He was born in a stable, not in a home at all. His whole life story and history is a difficult childhood. A small town that all thought he was an illegitimate child.
Right.
Might have made fun of him growing up. I mean, you could approach the gospel that way. It's something just in this conversation, Bill, I hadn't thought of that before. If you're talking to a generation that feels like we're in touch with our own brokenness, that we have a faith who's the center of our faith is someone who was broken and was not just a pitiful figure, but broken for you, right?
Right.
Yeah. Wow, Val, I hadn't thought of that before this conversation. That's really great. Thank you.
Val, when we were together last, one of the things you said, and I think this is kind of hitting on what you guys just talked about, but how important humility was when we meet with folks, that we can't come with like we said earlier, with all the answers, but humility is key. But one of the terms you use, and I wondered if you would describe it, you said pump the brakes. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, I do.
Could you describe what you mean because when you first said it, I thought, okay, that sounds cool. What exactly does that mean?
What do you mean? Yeah. Oh man. Well, I was talking about how sometimes we look at, and I do this too. I love kids, but I do this too. Sometimes you're just frustrated. You don't get it. You don't get what they're coming from. You don't understand why they're doing certain things. And that's me. That looks like me driving home going like, I'm wasting my life. Those nights where you just don't get it and you're frustrated. But one of the things that I've encouraged myself and I encourage others to do is suspend judgment just for a second. Before you're frustrated about the youth of America and how disrespectful and how and all the things, to suspend judgment just for a second. Not to say there'll never be room for it, but just wait, pump the brakes a little bit, and try to humble yourself and start asking questions. And those first three, that's kind of a three-step approach. Suspend judgment, just pause, tap the brakes, humble yourself, and then ask humble questions when you don't understand. And one of the things that with those questions, to try to get at the heart of what the person in front of you, and again, this applies for anything. It applies for young people of a different generation. It applies for someone across the world in a different culture, but seek to understand. What is it that they value? What is the disagreement here? Is it a value disagreement? Where does that really come from? And seek to understand. And sometimes for us, that looks like asking, to us, it's like asking dumb questions. Even sometimes students will bring something up and ask me if I know about it. And I can even be tempted to nod my head and be like, yeah, that thing. I know what you're talking about, because you don't want to be the uncool adult who has no earthly clue what they're saying. But I have found like that's a pride issue in me. That's a sin issue in me. But if I say, wait a second, no, actually, I don't know what that is. Will you explain it to me? Explain it to me. I don't know what that is. Oh my goodness, the conversations that you can have. When all of a sudden you kind of flip the tables, they're the teacher for a second, they're explaining things to you, and stuff starts coming out about, you'll hear all kinds of things about the things that they value, the things that are important to them. As simple as asking them, no, I've never heard of that artist in that concert that you're going to or you went to over the weekend. What do you like about them? What attracts you to them? Oh, they are, they never signed with a label and they want to do it their own way. Interesting. So that's a value that you have. Got it. They, are never, they wear whatever they want in front of the media and they're not wowed by the red carpet and blah, blah. Okay, interesting. So performance, not really into, you respect them for that. Interesting. That tells me something about what you value. And when you actually start and ask those types of questions, you start to actually peel away the layers a little bit. And you start to get to their heart and get to their values. And I think then, even if we disagree and if we still don't get it, I think that breeds compassion in us. At least breeds compassion in me. At least I think like, oh, you're not just crazy. You just think about things in a way different way than I do. And again, in that place, in that space, especially as adults and as godly adults, again, they're not right just because that's what their culture is saying and that's what they value. We put all things under the values of Jesus. So as adults, like we say, hey, let's talk about that value. Is that a value of Jesus? But it becomes way less like, hey, you got to do it my way. I'm frustrated. You need to put your phone away, to having a conversation and trying to understand the things that they value, and then opening up conversations that way. But it takes a lot of humility. It takes a lot of humility on our behalf, and it takes a lot of time. And we have to be willing to give that. Yeah.
I love this. I love these. These are great insights, Val. I really appreciate you sharing them. And I'm curious if you have any other insights any other thoughts on how we can effectively reach and disciple this generation. But before I do that, I just want to say, what are we going to call the next generation? I mean, if we reach Z, right? So where are we going now?
Oh,
What's
man.
next? Generation 1? Are we going to start with numbers?
AA.
Double A.
Maybe on this podcast we could name the next generation. We could come up with it.
Oh, Randy just did.
Idea.
Oh, what did he say?
I said AA, but you could also start like you name tropical storms or something like that.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Alfred.
It will be interesting, won't it? Somebody's gonna like just probably on a podcast say something, and it's gonna be like, that's the generation.
And it'll stick. Well, there's a woman who, her name is Jean Twenge, and she wrote this book called iGen, which is all about Generation Z. But I was really, she's kind of like any book that you read quotes Twenge, like she's kind of the gold standard on understanding this generation, was kind of the first one to do a massive study of them. But I really like iGen. I think it should have been iGen instead of Gen Z, because I think it kind of captures that, like the pendulum has the page has turned, and now we're into a new of the iPhone because of the internet.
It does. What do you think? What can you, off the top of your head? I asked you that one question, which I didn't give you time to answer, but off the top of your head, what would you say are like some contrast from like the millennials and Gen Z? Like, are you able to like say, well, the millennials valued this, or the Gen Z valued this? And do you have any quick comparisons that come to mind?
Oh man, well, I'm a millennial. I'm like a true to goodness in the middle millennial. They don't always get the best rep, but I would say that Gen Z, let's see, just a couple major differences. They're, like I said, they're just savvier. They're very, very savvy. I see in a lot in Gen Z, different decisions as far as higher education are concerned. They do not necessarily want to take on a ton of debt. They're more financially savvy than the millennials are, which is a very, very interesting trait that they have. They learn differently. This was actually one of the things that I was going to say, but they, just as far as like other things that we can kind of take away and learn, but, still I was raised where like you go to school because that's where the books are. Like you go to Sunday school because that's where the teacher is that has the information that you don't know. Well, that's shifted even in one generation, where online a student can find out anything that they want to know, where schools and churches and institutions are no longer like the storehouses of knowledge.
Let's go back to like talking about ministering to this generation. What are you learning about ministering? You've shared a lot, and I really appreciate it. And how can we effectively bring the gospel to them?
Oh man. Well, one of the things, even, and again, this was a segue that we weren't intending, but even the, going from the storehouses of knowledge, churches, schools, that type of thing, that these young people are so hungry for the application of knowledge. They want to have the knowledge applied. This is like the best thing that's ever happened to us. They are hungry for mentors. They are hungry for people to show them the way, not just to read an article, get the information, but for someone to walk alongside of them and show them for knowledge applied. And I love that, we see that in small ways, like even a YouTube, like the explosion of YouTube, when I got something the other day that I needed to set up in the mail, and I'm a millennial, I took the instruction manual for setting it up, threw it on my kitchen counter, and Googled a YouTube video of how to set it up, and watched somebody walk me through it, and walked outside and set it up. And I'm like, man, we'll even outsource our mentors to YouTube. That's how hungry they are for it. They want knowledge applied. They want someone to walk alongside of them and show them the way. And I think that they're hungry for that. And a lot of times we think, again, as adults, we think like, oh, they don't want my input. They don't want me to help them. They're not interested in having a relationship with me, but I'm telling you, they are, and they're hungry for it. And that's a really, really beautiful thing. And we have to be willing to step over that, to be to be uncomfortable, to incarnate ourselves into a different culture, into a different world, step into their world like Jesus stepped into ours, and walk alongside of these young people. And I think they'll be more receptive than you think.
Yeah, Jim, just a minute. I've thought about starting my own YouTube channel for helping kids, like showing them how to change the roll of toilet paper once it's out, how to put another roll on the thing, how to take the trash out. Like I've thought about, like, I could just wear a mustache or something and just do like, hey kids, let me show you how to change, how to put that little, you guys know what I'm talking about.
You're going to get an okay boomer here any second.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jim. What were you going to share?
No, I just got to actually, so something you just said, Val, is connecting with something you were saying earlier. And I wanted to go back to in reaching this kind of generation, because I loved what you were saying about the way you were listening and empathic listening. That was fascinating, because you said you were asking, like, some other concert you went to, what you liked about the artist. That was the example you used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you heard it, you were listening it seemed very intently, deliberately, consciously. You say, oh, that tells me about something you value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I forgot what it was in that exact example, but you were saying something like, I said, if you like this artist, would you like the fact that they didn't like the red carpet, that they didn't like those kind of accolades? And I'm wondering, and as you were saying that, I'm thinking about how that could touch down with the way you share the gospel with somebody, and the way you could say that as I listen intently to you, the things you find attractive, let me see if that is something that I can relate to Jesus and how Jesus was like that. So for example, Jesus would say, he wasn't trying to get accolades from the crowd. He said, here's a miracle, but don't tell anybody about it. I don't want to get fame and fortune. I'm not out for that. He wasn't flashy. Isaiah says he was not someone with great appearance that we should look at him, right? So I'm just wondering if you hear those as you, by the way, even if it doesn't touch on the gospel, what you shared about listening empathically, listening that intently was so great. That is so good about just being a good listener, just a good listening skill to find the values in what someone's saying. But I think if I would love to practice this, if we could listen that way, to say, now that I understand your values, how can I point you to those values that you can find in Jesus for yourself?
Oh man, I'm telling you, there's so many things that this generation does value that are values of Jesus.
Yeah.
We just have to let those be the bridges. Let those be the bridges.
And maybe because they looked at the generation before, I'm thinking of, this is a couple generations ago. Think about the televangelists of a generation or so ago that might have probably didn't even appeal to boomers, but not to millennials. Mm-hmm. They're flashy and they are glitzy and glamour and high flying. I guess there's still some of that around. There's still some of that. But that kind of thing seems like it might have appealed to a different generation that wouldn't appeal to Gen Z today. They'd say, no, thank you, not at all. Right?
Yeah.
But then try to find, well, what is it about the real Jesus that you can find and I can share with you? Once I listen to you, and once I've, what'd you say, pump the brakes, right? Mm-hmm. I stop enough to listen and find out what you really value, and then try to relate it to the values of Jesus. I love that, Val. I think that's really.
No, and it's challenging to us too, because even with them valuing what's real, wanting something that's authentic, it calls our bluff sometimes. It's challenging to me to say, okay, is my life, am I living the things that I say that I believe?
Right.
Because if I'm not, they're going to sniff that out in a second. And they're going to say, like, it's not real. She's just all talk.
Yeah.
It's not real to her. So it is a huge challenge to us. It's convicting to us to say, like, okay, are we living in a way that is the sweet aroma of life? That is appealing to, in a world where so many things aren't real.
Yeah.
Are we actually living out the message of the gospel in a way that is attractive because it's so genuine, it's so real? It's not just words, but it's our life. And sometimes we can get into our own, zone of, of being two different people. We can.
Sure.
And they'll call us on it. And it's a great challenge for us. And it's a great encouragement to the church. So
this is going to be, this has been a great conversation, and thank you so much for all your time. We do want to ask you, and you can be thinking about this, what books you would recommend for people to understand this better. If you have, one or two or three that you'd recommend. And then at the end of the podcast, if people want to get in touch with you, I want to have you share a way for them to get in touch with you. But before we do that, I just want to see if Jim and Randy have any further questions for you. Jim?
I did have one, and it circled back again to something you said earlier in the podcast about the morality. You mentioned C.S. Lewis. I often wonder this. I don't know, and I guess my question is if you have much success in showing this, because I see a generation that says, first of all, there is no morality, there is no right and wrong. How dare you push your Christian morality down my throat? Back off, go away. I get to decide what's right and wrong for me. But yet hold, and you mentioned this, so I'll just restating what you said as a contradiction. Hold so many moral, hard, fast positions and viewpoints.
Right.
And so I'll just pick one. They say racism is wrong. And I'll say, right, as a Christian, I believe it's wrong but I believe it's wrong because I have a God who's revealed in his word that it's wrong. And he says it's wrong. That's why. And they'll just say, everyone just knows it's wrong. But this contradiction to me seems it's not a deep philosophy. It's not philosophy 102. It's philosophy 101. It's 1 inch below the surface. Right. You say there's no right and wrong. There's no God. We're all evolutionary accidents. You say there's and yet you hold a lot of moral viewpoints on race, sexuality. The way people should that generation has a lot of very strong moral viewpoints, and I've had a few of those conversations. It seems hard for me to get them to see the contradiction. For me, that contradiction is 1 inch below the surface. It should not take long for them to say, oh, shoot, you're right. Wait a second, you're right. If what I'm saying is true, there is no morality. Why do I hold this moral viewpoints? Nothing is right. But I can't quite, it's really hard even in conversation to get someone to go that far, which to me seems so patently obvious. It's only like it doesn't seem like you have to dig deep into an inch below the surface. I just wonder if you've had any success with that and talking about that, because it seems like it's like they say they're willing to hold those almost two viewpoints contradictory at the same time. I know these things are right and wrong. My views on sexuality, your generation views on sexuality are wholesale wrong. My views are right, morally right. And then the next breath, there's no right and wrong. Right. No one can tell you what to do, and they don't see the contradiction in those two things. I'm hoping you've had some success with that, because I have not.
No, Jim, I'm right there with you. I'm right there. I think that, like I said, I think that is the issue. But I think, again, pausing and just gently tapping at it, maybe helping them see it from a different perspective, or even for me, starting to talk about, how have you always had that opinion? When did that opinion change? You have such a strong opinion on that. Like what helped inform how you feel about that? Who's been your teacher on that? And I think just asking those types of questions, it might not, it feels to us like, not going for the jugular, like the very obvious, right. This is a problem, right. But it's kind of like a roundabout way of trying to really for us to understand like where that worldview was shaped and how it was shaped. And it just opens up more points of actual conversation with them, as opposed to just them speaking, us speaking, them speaking, us speaking. And so I think that, again, that listening and that looking, looking for bridges of truth that we can build with them. Because again, there's so many things, that are, there's so much truth that is in there. It's just mixed with a lot of lies.
Yeah.
And I think we need to grab those truths and just try to connect them as quick as we can to Jesus. And just, oh great, now there's a thread there, to try to find those things that we can agree on and to try to build bridges from there into having those conversations. But they're hard. And again, a lot of us are so, we are really steeped, every single one of us, in our own culture, in our own worldview, that it's hard to even, if somebody starts to poke holes at that, our defenses are up so quick.
Right.
And so I think to really care about them as a person and start to ask those questions, I think we start to earn their trust and be able to speak truth into them and just draw those lines of commonality to Jesus. That's the only success that I've had, Jim.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's going to do. That's really great. It's you're right. It's not barging down the door, breaking down the door, and kicking down the door. It's that longer, slow process, and maybe is in terms of reaching a generation. That's what you're really about. It's the patience to do it the way you're describing. We really care about individuals and really want to just introduce them to your Savior. So that's great. Thanks for circling back to that. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Randy, how about you?
Val, give you time to talk about the books and your contact. I just said one thing I kept thinking about was, what is the impression for Gen Z toward the church? I know when I was growing up, the whole idea was it was antagonistic. And I think as over time, as I spent time in Scotland and in Ireland, it was more a feeling of apathy. It wasn't, it's just something from our past. It's not really applied to me. And I just wondered, has there been any study on what the feeling is toward the church, the organized church as a whole? Like what's the impression?
Yeah. Do you know what? Barna has done some really great research about that. Barna has done great research, and Fuller has done some really great research about that too. Just about young people and their perception of church and their relationship with it and their mindset about it. I feel like it's moved more towards, even again, when I was a kid, I felt like when people found out that I went to church and that I was a Christian, they thought that was like nice and quaint, where now it's a little bit more, it's far more hostile, and that's actually a threat to us. That thinking is harmful, as opposed to just like cute and quaint. So I think that's a very real thing that I've seen in that mindset. But again, I just try to brush those issues of the church right to the side as quick as I can, because there's a lot to talk about the church and what we've gotten right and what we've gotten wrong, that I might even agree with them about, but what I always try to come back to is Jesus. But what do you have against Jesus?
Amen.
What do you know about Jesus? The church has gotten it right and the church has gotten it really wrong. But let me tell you why I love following Jesus, and to always come back to that. So
that's awesome. Well, Val, what are some books that you would recommend to people who want to learn more about it? Do you have any off the top of your head there?
Yeah, like I said, Barna really has some great stuff about generations and research that's been done there. Fuller has some great stuff. I mentioned Jolene Erlacher earlier. She has a book called The Daniel Generation that I love. I think it's amazing. The premise of it is, have we been, we need to raise young people to live in Babylon now. And taking Daniel as kind of a case study of that, and what were the skills that he had to stand firm in his faith in this different culture. It's a really great and really hopeful book, not like the sky is falling kind of book, but just a really hopeful book about the future of the church. I really love it. And the other one that I mentioned, iGen by Jean Twenge. She is a secular scholar, but she's an excellent researcher, and her material is great. And so just anyone who's just interested in Gen Z, I would recommend that book too, also, to just try to get a handle on just who they are as a demographic and that type of thing. And there really is, like I said, a lot of great research about them and trends in all kinds of different ways. And so if you spend half an hour and say, hey, I'm going to spend half an hour doing some reading, you'll find out a lot of great, really helpful information about them. So, yeah.
Excellent. Hey, Jim, something you mentioned reminded me. of an article. And it's an article, it's called The 4 Killa Questions. Killa, like Killa. And it's how to get people to think critically. And these are questions you can use to open a dialogue with somebody that you disagree with. So the question 1 is, what do you mean by that? So when somebody says something about sexuality or something you do, maybe, you know, whatever it is, what do you mean by that? Question 2 is, where do you get your information? And then how do you know that's true? And then what if you're wrong? Now, you don't use these to, like, you're not trying to, like,
back them in a corner,
win an argument or bang them over the head. It's actually a way to have a genuine conversation and kind of help understand where another person's coming from. I think if you do it with humility, these 4 questions could be helpful to engage maybe somebody from Gen Z. Now, my last question for you, Val, is, are you saying that the millennial view of the church, the Gen Z view of the church, is different than the millennial view? That, in other words, that millennials tended to be soft on the church, or like more friendly to the church, where Gen Z is kind of hostile to the church? Is that a fair trend that you're suggesting?
You know, that's interesting. That was my experience, you know, growing up. And I think that as the millennials have aged, they are more similar now to Gen Z in that way and in that thinking. I would say that there's a lot of skepticism around the church and what they stand for, and a lot of that wrapped up into sexual ethics and those types of things, their view on science, you know, all of these things that just become these hot button issues, or that people even have preconceived ideas of what the church stands for, how they respond, you know, all those types of things. So I think that in that way, there are a lot of millennials who have bad taste in their mouth as far as church goes also. And so I think that is, it might manifest itself in a little bit different ways than Gen Z does, but I unfortunately think that is true. I would have to look more at some of that research that's been done about that to say, okay, what are the nuances of that difference? I don't know off the top of my head. But again, I think that, you know, it's the church's finest hour if we will be the people that Jesus has called us to be. And if we really embrace the life that Jesus has asked us to step into, again, I just think that what a huge opportunity we have to be the people of God that we're supposed to be, and let that be real in front of people. So, yeah.
Randy, did you want to make another comment? It looked like you wanted to say something. Okay. Hey, Val, if people want to get in touch with you, how could they find you?
Yeah. They can send me an email at vobrien, OBRIEN, at josiahventure.com. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. You can also find me on the Josiah Venture webpage under the US team. So in my contact information is there. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. So if you really want to find me, you can find me there also. So there you go.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. We are so blessed to have this conversation with you. I think it's going to help a lot of people. And I really appreciate your approach to sharing the gospel with humility and genuineness. So thank you, Val.
Thank you for having me so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.